In 1945, the most unique bombing missions of the 20th century took place. And besides the atomic weaponry that was used in them, the aircraft that carried out these missions were entirely unique as well. You might think they were just regular Boeing B-29s, but they were actually a special series called Silverplate. And today you'll learn exactly what these aircraft were. Opening. You've definitely seen one of these in movies, television shows, games, or maybe in a book. This is the tropical helmet, the Tropenhelm of the Afrika Korps. This type of tropical helmet was developed by European powers for use in their colonies in Africa and Asia. And this example, here called the Tropenhelm, was specially developed for use by the Deutsches Afrika Korps, the German Army Corps of General Ehrmann. And this piece here, which was once part of the War Room set, can now be yours. Since entry is just 5 reais, and you can buy as many as you want through the link in the description and also by the QR code on the screen. So go there, get your tickets because I'll be drawing soon, okay? So good luck. The atomic missions that ended World War II cost in total approximately $5 billion, and that's in 1945 values. Because $2 billion out of those 5 were spent on developing the atomic bomb, and the other $3 billion, where do you think that was spent? Was it spent on the development of this plane? Here, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, that's right. The Boeing B-29 cost more to develop than the atomic bomb itself. And yes, it is the most expensive project of World War II, but it's also an eternally well-known platform that paved the way for the so-called global strategic bombers, aircraft that could virtually reach any point on the globe and became so common during the Cold War. The B-29 cost so much to develop because it really had to fulfill a set of functions. No aircraft of that time could even remotely accomplish or reach targets at very long distances across the Pacific. And doing all that while flying at an altitude of 10,000 meters above the range of enemy anti-aircraft guns and also enemy fighters. And the entire bombing process, as well as the aircraft's defense, was computerized. Of course, they were analog computers, not digital computers like we have today. But what I mean is that the set of onboard technology in the Boeing B-29 was far superior to any other aircraft of that period. And all this set of new technologies being put into a single aircraft, of course, didn't result in a smooth development process. The first flight of a Boeing B-29 took place on September 21, 1942. And a few weeks later, the first prototype crashed during a test flight, killing dozens of people who were on board and also on the ground. And this super expensive project here, which was having such an unpromising start at the time, contrasted with another project that also cost a lot, but that at that very same time it was gaining momentum, it was taking its first steps to be able to achieve the expected results. That was the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb, which, just a few days after the first flight of the Boeing B-29, appointed its director. Finally, Robert Oppenheimer, a physicist from California, who would ultimately organize the entire atomic bomb construction project and, in the end, make it a success. It was Robert Oppenheimer who, in his first days as director, selected the Los Alamos area in New Mexico as the site for the construction of the new laboratory that would produce the atomic bomb. And just 90 days after this event here, the first flight of the Boeing B-29, the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi operated the first nuclear reactor in history in Chicago, showing many government officials that this mysterious science, subatomic physics, could actually result in a real weapon. Then, in the first half of 1943, at the newly built Los Alamos laboratory, the integration and delivery team of the project, led by physicist Norman Ramsey, developed the first design of what would become an atomic bomb. And that first design was quite long, about 5 meters and 70 centimeters in length. It had this pole-like shape, which ended up being nicknamed Thin Man. This Thin Man bomb was supposed to work with a plutonium-239 warhead and use the gun-type detonation method. In other words, a neutron generator attached at the other end was supposed to fire a neutron all the way along this path and hit the plutonium warhead right at this end, here, at that point in history. This weapon design was considered the most viable, and therefore, an aircraft capable of carrying a weapon of this size was needed as a secondary alternative, a safety design. The scientists at Los Alamos also developed a circular bomb called the implosion device. In this device, the core, or plutonium warhead, would be at the center and would be compressed by the 5G detonation of several explosive charges directed toward the center. This would then cause the core to implode, to compress, and that compression would detonate the weapon. This design here was much more complex than the first one, and therefore, at that time, it was considered only as a secondary alternative. And when did they start considering that the aircraft could carry this type of weapon? A single aircraft in the entire Allied arsenal worldwide, specifically the British bomber Avro Lancaster. This 4-engine plane produced in England, which was in full use by the Royal Air Force Bomber Command on daily bombing missions over Germany. It was the only one in the world that had a single bomb bay. A single compartment measuring 10 meters in length, 10 meters long, was enough to carry both the Thin Man and the Fat Man. The Fat Bomb, or Fat Man, which was the nickname given to the implosion device. However, the use of the Lancaster brought some inconveniences. The first of them was that it was not an American aircraft. This forced the adoption of a foreign system, which would complicate crew training a bit. Another factor was precisely the limitation of the Lancaster's operational range and also its operational ceiling, which was much lower than the operational ceiling expected for the execution of atomic missions, precisely in the range of 10,000 meters altitude, as I already said, out of reach of anti-aircraft and out of reach of enemy fighters. So, in June 1943, this physicist here, Norman Ramsey, who was actually the head of the Integration and Armament Entertainment Group of the Manhattan Project, decided that the Lancaster would not be used to deliver the atomic bombs. Instead, another plane that was still in the experimental stage, called the Boeing B-29, would be used. General Leslie Groves, the military commander of the Manhattan Project, approved this choice made by Norman Ramsey. This was largely because the B-29 represented the use of an American alternative for delivering the weapons. To him, it sounded much more appropriate than using a British aircraft. And in the following month, July 1943, Boeing delivered the first Super Fortress to the United States Army Air Forces. And then Groves went to Washington to talk to General Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, and inform him about the existence of the project. Manhattan. You can see the level of citizenship and secrecy involved in the project, since up to this point, not even the commander of the Army Air Forces himself knew about the existence of the development of an atomic bomb within the United States. Thus, in September 1943, Groves and Arnold agreed to modify 3 Boeing B-29s to carry mock-ups of the atomic bombs, which were still far from being ready. Originally, the project was to modify the B-29S to carry atomic weapons. It was named Silverplated, meaning silver-plated, It was a reference to the B-29S themselves, which had this silver finish chosen over the other finish. Olive drab, meaning olive green, was widely used in Europe. However, informally, people in the project ended up referring to it not as silver-plated, but simply as silver-plated. And so the name silver-plated was ultimately adopted as the official name. Despite this final choice, the name silver-plated, due to the high secrecy surrounding everything about the atomic bombs, was not officially registered with the War Department. This ended up causing another confusion because another project from a different agency was also given the name silver-plated. And because of this incident, General Arnold himself had to call the War Department and force the other agency to give up the name silver-plated and choose another name for their project, and to throw off anyone who might have already seen the name silver-plated. It was claimed that this project referred to a special modification of a Pullman car, a luxury passenger railroad car, which would be used by Franklin Roosevelt, the Thin Man, and by Winston Churchill, the Fat Man. And on November 30th, 1943, the B-29 with serial number 5BW-426259, nicknamed Pullman, because of the false story about the train car, and which at the time belonged to the bomber group 468 at Smoky Hill Air Base in Kansas, was selected to be sent to Wright Field Air Base in Ohio and to undergo the modifications that would make it the first silver-plated B-29 in Ohio. The modifications began to be carried out on the Pullman on December 2 of that year, and these modifications were extremely extensive and required a lot of work, with the most remarkable of them being the union. The joining of the two bomb bays of the B-29 each, measuring 3.7 meters, into a single large bomb bay of almost 10 meters in this new gigantic and unique bomb bay. The Thin Man bomb would be mounted at the rear section of the bomb bay, while the Round Fat Man bomb would be mounted at the front of the compartment. In addition to the drastic increase in the bomb bay, new suspension and bomb release mechanisms were developed and installed. But practical tests were necessary to know whether these mechanisms were reliable or not. After completing the modifications, Pullman was then flown to Muroc Air Base in California, where on February 20, 1944, it finally began its testing phase. With the launch of the Thin Man and Fat Man mock-ups, 24 test drop flights were carried out, and overall, they were quite disappointing. On the last of these flights, March 16, the Thin Man even detached from the plane in mid-flight, while the bomb bay doors were still closed. This caused extensive damage to Pullman, requiring it to be returned to Wright Field in Ohio for maintenance. Faced with such failure, the Americans then decided to use in the Silverplates the bomb suspension and release mechanisms developed by the British, which were used in the Lancasters to drop the large tallboy bombs. And finally, after months of repairs and also the installation of these British mechanisms, Pullman returned to California in June 1944. For another round of tests this time, the tests were carried out much more successfully. Even though Fat Man, the big bomb, was still behaving very erratically in the air, until the engineers developed this type of stabilizer for the weapon. This tail here, now quite famous, made up of 8 stabilizers separated by 45 degrees, became known as the California Parachute, or California Parachute, and it was officially adopted for the aerodynamic shell of the Fat Bomb. But then, just when things were starting to work, the Manhattan Project took a major hit, because it was around this time that this scientist named Emilio Segre discovered that the plutonium being produced at the Hanford reactor, the reactor developed by Enrico Fermi, actually had a much higher fission rate than previously expected. This happened because the plutonium that was originally analyzed by the physicists at Los Alamos were extremely pure samples produced at a laboratory at the University of California. But when the first samples of plutonium from Fermi's reactor arrived, it was noticed that they were heavily contaminated with plutonium-240, an element that ended up greatly increasing the fission rate per minute. Without wanting to go into too much detail about the physics at this point, this would mean that the Thin Man weapon would need to have a much longer barrel to accelerate one end against the other, and that would mean having a plane with a bomb bay even bigger than 10 meters. And the conclusion of all this was that Robert Oppenheimer ordered the complete abandonment of the model. Thin Man. The abandonment of Thin Man made Fat Man the only alternative in the hands of the scientists at Los Alamos, and from then on, it became the main one to be developed within the Manhattan Project. But in order to use uranium-235, the fissile element that was being produced within the project, so a shorter ballistic weapon was developed called Little Boy, precisely because of the height difference between the two devices. Instead of the previous Thin Man's 5.7 meters, the new Little Boy was only 3 meters long. And since now both Fat Man and Little Boy had similar lengths, a single large 10-meter bomb bay was no longer necessary. This made the Pullman return once again to its original configuration of 2 separate bomb bays, now back with its 2 original bomb bays. The Pullman was then sent in early December 1944 to Wendover Air Base in Utah, which was home to the newly created 509th Composite Group. The unit that was supposed to carry out atomic bombings was placed under the command of Colonel Paul Tibbets, the most experienced bomber pilot in the United States Army Air Forces, and who had already been leading the B-29 training program for several months. In fact, that same year, Tibbets had even faced a problem with crews refusing to fly the B-29S due to their supposed danger. Model. This story is quite interesting. You can check it out in our video about the B-29 Ladybird right up here. But unlike the 509th Composite Group, which was just beginning its very successful operational life, the Pullman, the first of the Silverplates, ended up being damaged and scrapped after an accident during a landing at the very end of December 1944. But 4 months before that, on August 22nd of that year, the green light was given for the production of a new series of Silverplates at the Martin B-29 factory in Omaha, Nebraska. The first 3 units of this second batch were sent to Wendover Air Base in October 1944. Already equipped with bomb suspension systems installed in the forward bomb bay of the aircraft, since the rear bay was occupied by extra fuel tanks. To further extend the Silverplate's range in these aircraft cabins, an additional position was also created for a crew member known as the weaponeer, or gunner, who was the person responsible for carrying out maintenance, and also the final arming of the atomic bombs in flight. The second batch of Silverplates was completed with the manufacture of 17 aircraft of this type, which were then subjected to an intense series of training and testing. In February 1945, these 17 aircraft had already been subjected to so many flights and so much structural stress that they had to be sent back to the factory for maintenance. This led to a third batch of Silverplates being ordered, and this third batch, initially with 15 aircraft, was delivered to the 393rd Bombardment Squadron, a unit of the 509th Composite Group. These would be the combat aircraft, the planes that would actually carry out the atomic missions over Japan, and during the process of receiving these bombers. Paul Tibbets personally went to the factory and talked to the head of the production line, asking him which of those planes. That one was the best of all, the one that was most within the parameters and had shown the fewest problems. The chief then pointed out the B-29 with serial number 4486-292, saying that of all the Silverplates manufactured in that batch, that was the best plane. And that plane would later become the famous Enola Gay, which Tibbets would personally pilot on the bombing mission against the city of Hiroshima. The new Silverplates from the third batch were much more technologically advanced aircraft than their siblings, which were already carrying out incendiary bombings over Japan. These planes were equipped with Curtiss Electric reversible pitch propellers, which allowed the direction of thrust to be changed on the aircraft, greatly assisting with braking, making these B-29s require a slightly shorter runway than usual. The bomb bay doors of these Silverplates were also fitted with pneumatic actuators, which made opening and closing these compartments much faster. And inside the bomb bays, British Type F suspension and release systems were installed with redundant activation, both mechanical and electrical. And these planes also received new Wright R335041 engines, much more reliable than those of the standard B-29 series, which even featured direct fuel injection. Finally, as you can see in this photo of Enola Gay here, these Silverplates also didn't have defensive gun turrets and had much of their armor removed as well to save weight and extend their operational range, since all of them were supposed to fly at 10,000 meters out of reach of any possible Japanese response. The story of the Silverplates is fantastic, and I'm sure you're eager to learn more about these aircraft, aren't you? You'll have that opportunity by traveling with the War Room on the Atom 2025 mission, which heads to the United States in October this year on the Atom mission. You'll be able to see up close this protagonist of military history, the B-29 Enola Gay, which is preserved at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And there, we'll also see the entire series of Japanese interceptors that fought against the B-29. After that, I'll take you to New Mexico, where we'll visit the city of Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb was developed. We'll also visit Robert Oppenheimer's house, the project's director. Besides that, I'll take you to visit the Trinity test site inside the White Sands base, which is only open to tourists one day a year. Starting in March 1945, all the Silverplates were placed under the command of Project Alberta, which was an extension of the project. Manhattan, which was taken to the Pacific, to the Mariana Islands, to prepare for the atomic bombings. And at that time, the crews of the 509th began training with the so-called pumpkin bombs, or pumpkin bombs. They were perfect replicas in shape and weight of Little Boy and also Fat Man. These missions, which were carried out both in the United States and also in the theater of operations in the Pacific, aimed to train the crews for all stages of the process of dropping an atomic bomb. So, several of these weapons were dropped on Japan throughout the entire month of July 1945. But then, at the beginning of August that year, the two atomic bombs finally arrived at the Mariana Islands, and the Silverplates could finally be put into action in their main role. On August 6, 1945, the first real atomic mission took off from the Marianas and dropped the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima. This mission was accomplished and considered a complete success, since the weapon detonated exactly over the planned point in the city below, causing almost total destruction of Hiroshima, which virtually disappeared from the map. 3 days later, on August 9, another Silverplate called Boxcar took off carrying the Fat Man bomb, which was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This mission, however, went through several setbacks, and the weapon ended up being dropped on the outskirts of the city, far from the originally planned ground zero. And if you want to learn in detail about these two atomic bombings, in fact, the whole history of the atomic bomb, you can watch our video here by clicking right up here. As a result of the two atomic bombings, Japan ended up surrendering just a few days later, bringing World War II to an end. In total, 46 Silverplates were manufactured during the war, and from those, some ended up joining the ranks of the 509th Composite Group, another 19. Silverplates from this third and final batch were delivered from the end of the war until December 1947. And, in total, 65 Silverplates were manufactured, with 57 of them by Martin in Omaha, Nebraska, and another 8 by Boeing in Wichita, Kansas. All of these Silverplates. They served at Roswell Air Base in New Mexico, which, after the war, became the new home of the group, the 509th Composite Group, the only atomic unit on the planet at that time. And in the year 1947, the name Silverplate was abandoned in favor of the new code name Saddle Tray, which ended up involving the modification of B-29, B-50, and B-36 bombers to carry atomic bombs. But just 2 years later, in 1949, the story of the Silverplates would come to an end with the retirement of the B-29 and their replacement by the new B-50, a much more capable variant. Developed and used during the Korean War, today only 2 original Silverplates remain preserved, precisely the protagonists of the 2 atomic bombings. The Enola Gay in Washington at the Smithsonian Museum, which we will get to see up close on the Atom mission, and the Boxcar preserved in Dayton, Ohio, in a large aviation museum, which you can see in our video right up here. And did you already know the story of the B-29 Silverplate? Did you know about the details that set these atomic B-29S apart from the regular series used in the incendiary bombing campaign? Let us know in the comments, as always. If you like this video, share it with your friends, and also give us a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the War Room so you don't miss anything. I'll stop here for now, and once again, thank you for watching. A big hug from the War Room.